Hello, here we are today with my good buddy, old friend Eric Wright. Eric and I worked together for a number of years, had a really great working relationship. I think we're kind of like-minded into when it comes to software and life and guitar playing, etc. So, Eric, I know you've uh, went on to better and greater things in life after you left Vancouver. Can you just fill us in quickly? What are you up to nowadays? What's happening in your life?
Yeah, lots, moved. I went from being on the systems architecture side on, working when we worked in financial services. And then I went from there, I was a blogger while I was doing that. That
Mhm.
was a good way for me to kind of stretch my muscle of learning that I was kind of forcing me to tackle problems and learn through teaching and writing. Ended up doing some public speaking and some community events. And then from there, that ended up getting me connected up with a company that they were looking for a technology evangelist. And that was a thing back in, now we call them developer advocates and, or developer relations, etc. But yeah, so I did that for 8 years. God, it's been that long. And so I was a company called Turbonomic. We were acquired a year and a half ago, or I guess almost 2 years ago, by IBM. And I was an IBMer for about a year, and then made the jump from there, and then started my own company called GTM Delta. So co-founded a company specifically around technical marketing and technical product marketing for companies, because working with amazing folks like yourself and learning about the experience of like how people consume software and how do we make it easier to understand in real human terms. I kind of learned that my superpower of giving emotion to technical content has a pretty cool value. And so that's I've been at that, I guess, now for 6 months, and we're growing like crazy, which is kind of cool. Everybody says it's a good problem to have. Still a problem, but
Yeah.
but it's good. Yeah, still playing lots of guitars. I've acquired a few extra.
Oh,
The
wow.
collection seems to grow, and along
Wow.
with my bicycle collection and such. So
Wow. No, that's amazing. I didn't know that, Eric. This is fantastic. The specific purpose of what I'm trying to do here, and that's why I'm happy you were able to join, is I think you are a progressive thinker. I think you are amazingly open to trying out new things and you're not stuck in your ways, which I find incredibly inspiring. My beef, as you may have noticed, is that when it comes to software profession, we're pretty stuck in the old ways. It's pretty stagnant. Meanwhile, we look at other areas of engineering, it's just skyrocketing, with all these, especially hardware and processes and uh, you know we can talk forever about other things, but in software we're still kind of doing this kind of hammer and chisel, code as text. Everything is pedestrian, takes forever. You make a change and it takes weeks and weeks and weeks until somehow makes its way in production. It's
exactly.
really it's I don't know what the word is. It's disheartening, and I'm looking at guys like you to advise us as to what breakthroughs can we expect, or maybe you're already into it, so that we can really break through that barrier and go and spread our wings and start really, delivering value rather than being stuck in this old choo-choo train. Oh, it takes forever. You know what I'm talking about. It's just like
Yeah,
boom,
yeah.
right? And it's very frustrating. And we know that we can do much better, and yet we're somehow sitting here getting away with the murder. Nobody, maybe sometimes somebody gets their hand slapped, and then we continue. And even if somebody gets let go, they just walk across the street, get another job over there, and continue.
Yeah.
So, what's your take on that?
I think the what I learned in trying to progress the speed, or sorry, not the speed, the velocity, right? So truly increasing speed, but in a meaningful direction, right? So it's the difference between speed and velocity. Is speed is just fast, but not directional. Velocity has direction, right? It has a destination point. And thinking like, what was the purpose of why we began to do what even years ago, right? Like the practices that I learned from you and learned with Jody and learned with the team in like rethinking how we did things on the operations side. So I mean, I came from the ops
Yeah.
side of the world, and I still, predominantly live in that sphere. But for me, it was more, I learned, like, how do I better service you as a client rather than my CIO, or rather than, like, obviously the my team and my business is always my client, but ultimately I am a service provider to a developer, to a development team. And it was incumbent on me to get better at giving a better client experience to you. And that meant walking a mile in the code of your shoes, right? Like understanding what it is we deploy, learning why things work. I was naturally curious, so I think that's probably what drew me to like go further and think differently about it. But I think as an industry, and just as a practice for operations teams especially, we need to really think of getting out of the way, right? What can we do? Because we just hold on to this, like, I do this thing, so therefore it's important. Like I can sweep the floor, I can get on my hands and knees and I can scrub the floor, forever. And is that value, right? The floor is clean. That's the outcome we're looking to achieve. But I can also get a Roomba, or I can even get a Dyson vacuum, or I can even just get a mop with a large head, right? We forget that we set an outcome, we have one path to reach that outcome, and then, like a playoff beard, we never change it because we're afraid that we're going to jinx that process.
Mhm.
And it's really this thing of, like, as people, how do we sort of, shake them out? Like, you got to make it really be painful to the point where they need to change. And when I describe, like, especially operations and even development teams, technology people have an incredibly high tolerance for pain,
Mhm.
not unlike cyclists. It's disturbing. Like, so we just let these horrifying, repetitive, mundane practices go on, and we like, oh yeah, good job, right? I filled my day, right? I filled my day with meetings, and then I did some stuff, and I typed some things, and then I put in a change request, and then the change request got approved, and so therefore in 3 days I can make the change. And it, like, we have to get away from how we do it to back to why we do it, and really question things. I think the fact that, cloud and Kubernetes, sorry, this is the longest possible answer to your question, but, like,
Good.
just in general, everything that we have to do is, we've got so much new access to methods and technology that are really, really working in new ways. And it's going to force us to kind of question, like, you can't do serverless, you can't do containerized applications the way we did physical servers, right? So it's kind of forced us to adapt. But what we often do, because we're humans and we love consistency, not consistency, but, like, we love familiarity.
Yeah.
So what we do is we bring forward as many of the poor practices as we can to maintain familiarity into this new ecosystem. And, like, that is where there has to be this sort of point where it no longer works. The types of infrastructure we're deploying onto are kind of cutting the cord from that. We can no longer do traditional change review board type of implementations. We can't do these things with we have more people that are thinking about immutable, artifacts, right? How do we maintain that? How do we maintain life cycle of not just code, but a true application life cycle? We're getting there, but the weird thing that just gets me is, you go through the history books, and you could probably go back to bloody Egypt, and you'll find people that are talking about these practices for decades, right? Randy Shoup, good friend and fantastic human, and he's doing really, really slick stuff. You and he would get along like a car on fire, as they say. And he says, like, basically all this idea of, like, DevOps is just SOA done right. Right? Like, it's taken us 30 years to kind of achieve this goal, and they've given it a new label. But in the end, it really is just this idea of, like, microservices and DevOps, and these practices are like agile. It was, RAD, right? That was the old, I go through my project management book, and it's like software development lifecycle, and this new concept of rapid application development. I'm like, that looks kind of like agile to me. It's getting there. It was the birth of what would become agile, because we at that point said, folks, we're not doing inline code anymore. We're not doing batch programming at night. Like, the mainframe went by way of the T-Rex, in effect, still there in a huge sense, but like, as active development's not happening there. So I don't know what the thing is that's going to force us to make the move, but and people are unlikely to make it. That's the hard part. Like, technology is going to force us more than people will, because people just love familiarity way more than they like the excitement of new things as a distribution, right? So you look at any normal distribution curve, right? There's going to be people like you, folks that are leading the curve. Randy, I try and move to that front of the curve of knowing, what's available and what's next. But most of the people are in that normal distribution where they prefer not to shift, change, learn. They prefer familiarity over excited by the new thing. And that's the trailer that the tractor is pulling, unfortunately, and you and I are on the tractor.
Yeah, I know it. And yeah, it's frustrating, but that's a very, very brilliant way to put it. I totally nailed it. Um, this tolerance for pain. Like, anytime I'm in a situation where I propose something like, hey, why don't we look into it this way? Maybe this will. The most typical pushback answer is, why? It works for us. It always works for somebody. Everything works for somebody. And the, like you say, the incentive to change is like, why would we change something if it works for us? Yes, it works for you, and you're screaming in pain, but it works.
That's right.
Yeah, it does work. So this status quo, maintaining status quo, it's a normal. It's my propensity, and I'm not. That's human nature. I like, keep things as they are. Keep the familiarity, comfort zone. I'm in my comfort zone. Why should I make myself uncomfortable, right? However, the progress happens anyway, right? So, for example, my favorite example, when they discovered the steam engine. Okay, that was a great breakthrough, and the first application was drilling holes, right? Then somebody came up with this idea. Hey, why don't we put this on a cart, right? And pulling other cars, and we have a train, and now it's steam engine locomotive. Okay, awesome. And that was a huge breakthrough. But then somebody says, wow, that's great. Why don't we put it on a boat, right? But you know how the first iteration went on the boat? The steam engine was actually pulling oars, rowing.
Right.
So right there, it's painful. It's like the least optimal way to utilize or leverage your steam engine is by rowing, right?
Yeah.
Until somebody made a breakthrough and came up with this idea called propeller. The propeller was extremely counterintuitive to the folks back then. Like, because how do you move? Either wind or you're rowing, right?
Yeah.
And so I think we need something like a propeller in some breakthrough that will say, okay, this is counterintuitive. This is something that comes out from the left field. Nobody saw it coming, but now that it's there, right? Why don't we do it? So that's what I'm talking about. And we are all banging our head against the wall. You're banging your head. I'm banging my head. And from the operational side, one thing that I want to chat with you a little bit, if you don't mind. I remain mystified because, okay, look, I started my career 30 years ago, right? And back then, there was no internet. So basically, I was developing applications. And then when I was done for the client, I would actually drive to the client. I would cut the tape or cut the floppy disk. I would drive over there and I would install on the client side, or I will courier or mail it, right? So it was a physical barrier to shipping. And indeed, it was shipping one way or another.
Right. Yeah. We're shipping code.
We were shipping, right? Because it was on the physical media. Somebody has to run upstairs and shove it into the computer and install it, and etc. And then when we moved to the web, this shipping ceased to be physical and is now electronic and it's instantaneous. But still, we retained that model of going step by step. Like I don't know why. Like, why do we have to go through some barriers to ship something? Like, it's done, it's ready, it should be immediately available. But no, we go through all these like gated phases and rubber stamping and this and that. It's almost like we cannot get out of that predicament of a physical process where I have to physically go somewhere and put it on this or that. So
Yeah.
what's the take on that from the operations side? Why do we need to do that? Is this just some kind of a hardened habit, or is there a valid reason why we are slowing down that delivery and erecting barriers and saying, okay, not so fast?
I think everybody has, I sort of treat it as like a slide ruler of like sort of a window in which they work, where they've got a certain amount of history that's informed their current practices and behaviors. And then they have a belief of a life of that practice and behavior, that if I can do this and this will maintain, I can maintain this comfortably for X number of years before it will be questioned as whether it's the right reason or not. And some people have really long sliders, right? You and I and a lot of folks that we talk to have very short sliders. Like, I'm constantly looking like, is this, I'm way more happy to seek the right answer than to seek to be right.
Mhm.
And that's a tough thing to get through as a youth. Even I was younger, when you and I worked together, very different attitude on kind of like wanting to be the happy and right, like wanting to sort of get a bit of a kudos for completing a thing. Now I'm like, I'm so disconnected from that love of the kudos, because I just want the thing to work. And but this is the idea, like every human has this sliding frame that they want to maintain consistency through. The best thing you can have, in a weird way, is turnover in the organization, because what it does is, especially when it brings a new person in, they come in with no preconceptions, like they don't have any history. And you can tell, like you can see the allergy that people have to it. It's there's like an antibody development in the
Yeah.
team to like, no. What do you mean we're going to do this, right? I remember bringing in, I think it was James, the one fellow brought in this idea of test-driven development, which was not new, but it was new to us.
Yeah.
And to suddenly have all these people like, whoa, hold on, like this would require us to go back and revisit code, and this is not how we do things. But if we were to bring in James as the head of development, it would be in 6 months, everyone would be like, oh, this is normal, right? It's because he has no history, has no preconceived notions of how it should work.
Mhm.
But the hard part is you also want consistency of, maintaining a team that has, a real societal level of co-behavior, right? That they interact well with each other. And I've seen it even on the ops side. I was working with one company. We were getting ready to potentially merge, with another company, and I was brought into the secret room. Right, they're like, "Hey, you're crazy, and you like to touch new technology. Can you come with us?" And I found myself in a room, signing a non-disclosure agreement, and suddenly meeting all these senior architects and senior systems analysts and such, and we were going through this idea of like, hypothetically, if we were to merge two large electronic directories, how would we do this? And it was like, oh wow, this is not a hypothetical, and this is a war room that has not been legally named yet. And we went through all this, and we, for 2 days, we're suddenly like learning about each other, and each of us, you could see, was like, well, our directory is really good and we've got really good stuff wrapped around it, so all we gotta do is like take your people and put them in our directory. Well, then the other team is like, well, that's an interesting idea, but we've got a lot of automation built around our directory. So actually, if we take everybody from your directory and put them into ours, that would be the ideal, because we've got way better mature practices for automation. And each of us was 100% right. We had stuff that worked. And along came this one guy. I remember I call him a kid, right? Because he was probably 25, worked for Microsoft Consulting Services. They bring him in. He comes in. Everybody's dressed up. He comes in with jeans, t-shirt, leather jacket, hangs it over the chair, looks at this whiteboard and says, what are we trying to get done here? And so, well, we've got these two directories and we need to do whatever. And he's like, okay, how many people in each directory? 5,000, 5,000. Literally, it is tug of war, equal strength. And he says, and he just draws a triangle in the middle and then draws lines to the other two triangles and says, we create an interim middle directory. We move the practices and policies there, and then we bring everybody up So it becomes the parent, and then ultimately we shed off the children. And now both sides were equally frightened, but then we're like, okay, if you've suffered and I've suffered, then I'm okay with the suffering. But it's always this thing like this fairness and the belief that if I put extra effort in, if I change the way we do things, is there a fairness to me that I'm putting extra effort? And I think that's a human behavior problem too, of like, I don't want to do something new because it would make it seem like the thing I did before was not correct. And it takes extra effort more than just doing what I used to do. And we inherently as humans struggle with fairness. I mean, electronically, we struggle. Like a fairness algorithm is one of the most difficult ones to achieve. So, sorry, again, like a super long answer, but as I think more about it, I think that is really the thing of we want to be fair to ourselves with our time and our effort level. And that's a tough thing. That is the strongest white blood cell of an organization. That is just, anything that comes in, it will just attack and fight against new things. And that's the thing that we have to we have to upset the apple cart, or, kind of, move the cheese, as they say.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's good. It makes sense. I'm just getting more and more mystified with all these like different stages and different environments, which sometimes almost feels like a make work situation.
Right.
With a lot of heavy lifting. And okay, so now I have my local environment, then I promote to some kind of a higher environment, I can call it dev, and then we mess around there. But then when everything's cool there, we kind of move into the QA environment, and that is like staging, and this is UAT, and this to me makes very little sense. I'm confused. Why do we have to have all these, wringing our hands and
Right.
yeah, it may not work over there, but why are we creating systems that are so vulnerable to environmental conditions? In other
Right.
words, in one environmental condition works beautifully. Yeah, works on my computer. Hey, what's your problem?
That's right. Worked fine in my local
I
Docker
don't know what
instance.
you're talking about. Works on my computer. And then all of a sudden you put it over there, it doesn't work at all. Wouldn't even start. So the system is fragile. It is easily, attacked by some condition that is just like, I can't cope. I'm just going to go to sleep. To me, it may be harsh, but that's like shoddy engineering. If you are not top of mind, should be this immunity from and there is a way to achieve that, but nobody seems to be keen on that, right? So we just go through this, okay, try over here. Oh, it doesn't work. Okay, now I have to make some changes. Try again. Oh, now it works. Okay, cool. But now it doesn't work over there. Okay. So this to me is incredibly wasteful, and yet there are no consequences. No, it's okay. It is what it is. That's how the cookie
It's
crumbles.
almost celebrated. That's the even more. It's actually, people are applauded for, oh, thank goodness you stopped that thing from going to production and causing a problem.
He's a great goalie. We love it. He's a fantastic goalie.
Right.
But this is fighting symptoms. Why don't we stop and look at the root causes? Like, what is causing this? Why are we wasting weeks, months, just tweaking that and trying, and everything is like, oh my God, now I'm afraid to put in production because I don't know, and all this like walking on eggshells. That is not giving our profession a very brilliant image out there. So another breakthrough that I'm thinking, how do we fix that? What do we have to do to move from this kind of, the needle is stuck, right? We keep chasing our own tail, burning weeks, months, nothing's happening, and everybody's like, oh my God, right? What's going on? So we don't look that good. And I want to avoid that because that's unfair to us. There's a lot of good work happening that is not now precluded from seeing the light of the day because of all these like arbitrary checkpoints and blah, blah, blah. So do you have any insights or suggestions on how
it's not unlike saying like you've learned a new a chord or a new arpeggio run, but what we need you to do is we need to try it on an acoustic and a ukulele and then a banjo, and then need to try it on a Martin, and need to try it on a Seagull, and you need to try it on a Yamaha, because you never know. And you're like, I was very proud of the chord progression I've created, And then by the time you
or
do this,
or
you
excuse me.
no longer want to develop new chord progressions. You actually are, you have been so browbeaten that you're like,
Or,
fine.
or
Uh,
or somebody hands you another guitar and say, okay, now play it here, and you play it, sounds awful. Like, why? Oh, it's alternate tuning.
right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You're like, yeah. Play it on a banjo. You're like, I didn't write it for a banjo, but
But all it takes is you detune some strings on the guitar and your fingering won't work. And like, why doesn't it work anymore? Right?
right. Yeah. And I think that's this is the hard. It's not unlike, look at what Kahneman and Tversky, sort of did in the idea of behavioral economics. It took psychologists to break economies, like how to understand. Like economists were like, no, this is how it works, and
Mhm.
these folks were from the outside going like, no, this is actually not how it works. We've tested things out. We almost need, you look at like the DevOps movement, right? It was really great, like as a progression from the agile, sort of the agile manifesto, right? The you read that mantra of these, how we practice and why we do this, and it really was a profound thing. The hard part was, just getting people to first of all believe that it is true, accept that it is a good way to go for themselves,
Mhm.
and then we have to somehow create rewards. And I think that's part of the problem. We have to somehow create a reward where moving faster, with consistency is rewarded. Automation on the operations side is where a lot of stuff is moving, right? Infrastructure as code, better automation practices, because we just get tired of getting called at 3 a.m. for a problem. So we develop better automated practices to make things move faster consistently. And that's the biggest challenge we've got, is like making it happen consistently, whether it's across environments or whatever. But then when it comes to code development, you then are battling the operations team that feels like they own the real estate. It's like, I want to build an amazing house, but then you've got to come and fight the landowner.
Yeah,
And
but that's
even worse, you've got to fight the city, because the city owns the legal rights to do things on this land and this house.
but that's a great opportunity. You just bring an excellent point. I think you guys, if you're still put your ops hat on, you guys should be aggressive. And this is what, I think you are doing it to me when we were working together. You should aggressively push back and say, hey guys, get your act together. Don't make systems that are so flaky that it seems beautiful in one environment. As soon as I put it over here, it breaks.
Right.
You should have that uh, veto power to say, look, this is substandard. You guys need to go back to your drawing board. You need to go back to school, figure it out. You need to push back. And I would welcome that, rather than just kind of shrugging and say, hey, it is what it is. These guys are over there in their magical corner making some stuff up, and now we're trying to make it work. And you were suffering, right? You were frustrated. I remember.
Right.
Everybody was like,
Yeah.
because we were so immature. We did not realize that just because it works on my computer doesn't mean anything.
Well,
And
and I think if we look at the way that our organization evolved, it was this idea that you came into the org with a different language, a different platform, a different method, and then you bring in, so you've got that is sort of a restructuring of thinking, and then on top of that, doing it on a platform that was not familiar to our team because we were a Windows shop, and all of a sudden you're developing on Mac and testing on Linux. And so we had this fun part. So there's two ways that we could deal with this, right? One is when you hand me code, I could say, no, I need you to make it work on Windows, or I could learn Linux, right? So we have this sort of crisscross.
or
And
the most important thing is you need to make it so that it works anywhere.
right,
It should be immune to the environmental conditions. That is the dictum that I'm hoping that ops will put their foot down and say, look, I'm not taking this. You guys,
precisely.
there is a way to do it. Don't tell me there isn't a way. You're
Yeah.
just lazy, or you're just even ignorant. You don't even realize that, right? That is very important, a very important point. If we can get to that point, and we should evangelize that, and ops should be aggressively pushing back. And like you say, I'm the city, I own the city, and I'm zoning this city. And you cannot build this enormous monster house here and risking fire spreading out, right?
Yeah.
and that should be regulated, I believe. And when I talk about regulation, people get all tied into all kinds of knots. You're killing creativity, blah blah blah. No, we need to regulate the consequences of lousy engineered systems,
Right.
which can cause harm. Right.
Yeah,
So,
this is an interesting point of like regulation is seen as breaking the ability to innovate, right? It's seen as guardrails. Like, well, it is but automation is about guardrails. Like automation as a practice is about codifying human practices in a way that creates consistency of outcome.
yeah, yeah.
Like it's not just about speed. It's like I could make it go fast, but if it's like a bloody Rube Goldberg machine that just who knows what comes out the other side, that's not going to produce, like no one would want to use that twice, right? So this creating consistency of outcome with the effective guardrails that you work within, then at that point you can then innovate
Yeah.
before the machine and after the machine. You've got a consistency of this pipeline,
But
and that's people just fear rules, or they fear that they aren't the ones that make the rules.
but you see the common misunderstanding, the ever recurring pattern that I always get whenever I start talking about regulating, right there, knee jerk, everybody jumps in and thinks I'm talking about regulating the way we are developing software. I'm not talking about that ever. The
Right.
way we develop software is nobody's business. There's many ways to skin a cat, and different teams will come up with different ways, and that's fine. What I'm talking about is regulating the consequences of your software, how it
Right.
behaves in the real world. Is it causing harm? Is it ruining someone's life? I think that should be heavily regulated. How you build it, don't care. But
Right.
once you release it out in the wild and you start charging people, or you start, now you're on the what's the word? Not on the whipping post, but now you are responsible for your product. But I'm not
Right.
seeing that. I see a lot of these just create harm, and then maybe their stock goes down or something. But there's no regulated repercussion saying, look, you cannot. Even Toyota recalls some seat belts, and all. You have to recall your software. Right, and then there's
Yeah.
penalties that will, I believe, make people sit up and say, okay, look, we gotta get our act together.
Right. And I think if we look at human behavior as a general rule, loss aversion is the most compelling thing that can trigger change, right? And whether it's literally like we're going to fine you if you deploy code with no tests. Like we're like it almost needs to get to that point, like where, are you doing, like people today still think testing means you push code through all these environments and then you call somebody and they click through the test sequence that they wrote, that you coded. Like that is you're testing the pure working thing that you were asked to design. What you need to do is hire somebody that's like, I have no idea what this is, and set them free on it, right? And through software and the idea of like mutation testing and different real true adaptive testing, that needs to be a gate that comes up front, not at the end. We still to this day have like write the code, then write the test that makes my code look good. And we're still so backwards with
Yeah,
that.
yeah. And as Deming said, you cannot inspect quality into a product.
Right.
You can only build it as you're making it. By the time it's done, you can detect something's wrong, but you cannot inspect quality back into it, right? And that's why I'm so excited to have you join today, because I think we should start really seriously looking into, and you are very experienced in that area. How do we legitimize ops to be the sort of say, look, this software that you are now putting out, I think it's shoddy. We think it's gonna cause harm, and we should have enough jurisdiction to kibosh. So, okay, this is not going anywhere. You have to go back. Uh, I'm not seeing that. Right? Uh,
Right.
there are no consequences unless we're talking, airplane, all these like medical. Okay, but in general business sense, there's so many business systems that can really harm people, and because of the low quality, and secrets leak out, and we don't want to
Yeah.
go there, but and there's no repercussions, and then the teams who built that, like they're not being uh, chastised or anything. Just look, keep creating your magic, whatever it is, right? So we need to Um, One thing I want to also mention, Eric, is I'm working with some people over here in Vancouver. We are building what I call the software development or software developers guild. I want to build a guild, which would be the association that would provide designation to professionals, so that, for example, I'm interviewing, hiring a lot of people, and right now, because of the situation in the world, we are pretty much hiring from anywhere on the planet. Don't care,
Right.
because we are working remotely anyway. So now, all I have is those resumes, and I have to spin my wheels and try to interview them. Wouldn't it be nice if somebody comes to me with a designation in their hand and saying, "Look, I've been through this software developers guild. They have vetted me as me knowing how to do test-driven development, service virtualization, all these things that guarantee quality." It would be much easier than me reading through the resumes, trying to read between the lines and figure out how
Right.
fluffed up this resume is, right? So, y- you know, I mentioned this because I would like to eventually ask you to join us on the board, right? For the guild. We need people like you to formulate the programs, the designation of some sorts. What would you think about that?
I'm in. I'm in.
Right.
You don't even need to ask twice. This is yeah. It's I really like this idea because what you think of it, it's a collective sort of independent practice. Building of practices and methods which are lived experiences from a bunch of people that are in real environments, and we can kind of say like, hey, well, we do this need over here, and so we can sort of take the best of all those things, find the I hate to say optimal because optimal is such a nothing is optimal is a very odd word, but we'll say maybe the average or at least the median at which you can say this is these
The
are
bar.
certain gates that we've set, right? That if you
Set the bar.
set a
Yeah.
certain right, yeah, and you can have somebody that says like so TOGAF on the architecture side, right? We've got each vendor has their own. So VMware has something called VMware Certified Design Expert, and so like top tier certification. Nutanix has one, Microsoft has one, Dell, like they've all got independent ones. But then there's TOGAF, which is the independent,
Yeah.
body, and that's what we need
We,
for
we're not vendor.
development and operations, right? Like we need that.
So the vision here is we're not vendorized. We're not around any product or platform or business model. It's mostly going to be .org, right?
Right.
So
As
not
it
for
should be.
yeah.
Yeah, and,
.org.
and you think about because what it does is it gives the opportunity for somebody to feel like they can contribute their lived experience and sort of get the best of that thing. They get the beautiful dopamine hit of contributing, code and sort of, code and documentation, which is actually one of the best things you can do. And a method, right? Here's so I've done this. Like, here's a practice we say, like, you must have TDD before it goes to first push, right? So you commit, missing test, sorry, gated, it gets booted back. Like, oh, okay, how do we set that up? Here's a couple of example configurations with GitLab, with whatever. Like, so people could put in vendor specific implementations of these practices, but we as a group are not beholden to a vendor's limitations. We just say, here's the practice that we should follow. How do you productize the delivery of this practice
Yeah.
and this method?
Fundamental principles. Um, Ensuring that you know. Also, another thing I'm thinking is we can offer the second opinion on interviews. Like, let's say you're interviewing somebody, you think they're good, you call somebody on the software guild, hire them for half an hour to give you
Yeah.
the second opinion, right? Neutral. I don't care. Like, I can just give you how I see it, and then you can compare with your notes and decide if indeed it's a great
Right.
candidate. Or the
This
other way
is
around, somebody's supposed to be great, but you were not impressed. Well, maybe I'm missing something. Maybe somebody can uncover something that's like, oh, thanks, great. Now I know that. I think we'll go for the offer. Right.
yeah, this is, I mean, and looking at, I learned a lot from your method of hiring. And it was funny, I'd never thought about it until, in the operations side of the world or in general IT, it's always like, oh, okay, you look at the resume, I was sort of hired on an interview more than my resume. My resume is like, okay, it says you've done a bunch of things. I kind of believe it. I'd worked at a pretty significant scale. So it was actually, there wasn't concerns about my ability to handle the scale and type of work, but it was more like, are you going to fit within the team? And it was a personality sort of test, over coffee that occurs doing that. But there was no there's no sort of take home. There's no like walk away thing. And then I remembered seeing your hiring method, which was like, I'm going to give you 2 exercises, right? And I need you to, build an application, very simple hello worldish type application. However, you need to build a second service, which consumes the first service and actually then can take an action against it via a RESTful API. You're like, okay, cool. And you'd see people would come back and the replies back were almost laughable sometimes. You're like, I've asked you to build 2 applications. You built 1. There's no service interaction. There's no API. You're like, that's a great gate. And then I thought to myself, when I was in shoe repair, we wouldn't hire somebody saying, do you know how to fix shoes? Because no one knows how to fix shoes. This is a 80-year-old art that no one does anymore.
Yeah.
So what I said is, if I give you 2 exercises to do and we do them together, like a pre-interview, but you're in the environment, like prove it, a practical type of implementation. And so we would literally bring someone, I'm sure there's all sorts of insurance reasons why we shouldn't have done it, bring them near moving sanding belts and equipment, but we would let them do it and sort of see, number one, how do they think about what needs to be done? You don't give them a set of instructions, you give them an outcome they want to achieve. And then you sort of, it's that, see, show, or learn, show, do, whatever, like this idea of like, I'm going to I know this thing and I'm going to tell you how it works. Then I'm going to show you, and then you're going to tell me what you saw, and then you're going to do the thing. And okay, cool. I like your method. I don't know that you can solve a problem if I put it on the board, but I know if I give you a problem, I know how you're going to approach the problem. Yeah. And that's even the sort of this idea of like, can you have people that can vet people that way? But even better, can we create ways in which it urges people to learn? Like, hey, why are people making it through the SDG with no problem? And I don't know what I'm missing, right? Like, we're not holding these practices like, we're gonna be your gatekeepers. It's like, no. This is why we do these things. Here's examples of how it works. Here's people that do it, that are in an open community, that love to share ideas, stories, and methods. Like, we love to share learnings, and there's enough people that are comfortable giving it away, in a sense, not concerned that is like the IP of their life.
Yeah.
Like, the giving away of it is my IP. The fact that I won't hold it close to my chest and say that, no, this is all mine. That wrote the script and I'm going to make it a binary and you're never allowed to see it. You're like, no, here's the code. Go for it. If you can make it better, fantastic. Thank you.
Okay. Exactly. Yeah. No, that's excellent. So flipping the table for a moment, just want to ask you, have you ever heard of the, how should I call it, platform or called Dark Land?
No. Okay.
So the person, Paul Bigger, a very smart guy, who actually created Circle CI. You're probably familiar with Circle.
Yes. Yeah.
So he built Circle CI and successfully, and then he sold it and got a nice little compensation for it. Then he went with that money and built this thing called Dark. And Dark is basically, the idea is as follows. It's the anti-Unix philosophy. Unix is all about having all these different little things that you can pipe them together and you get different things done. And so, when you're thinking about tooling, for example, in Unix world, you have millions of these little tools that you can, this is a compiler over here, and then it's I don't want to go into all the details. And then all these things are kind of fragmented, and now it's like you're assembling a puzzle, right?
Yeah.
His approach is more like one-stop shop. So you have everything baked in. You don't have to reach out for any extra tool, any extra. So everything's baked into this platform, including the development and everything. So I encourage you to go and check. I'll send you the link
Yeah,
down.
yeah.
So basically, every keystroke is live. There is no there is no staging. There is no development environment. There is no QA. Every keystroke is live. Now that sounds insane, right? But it is really interesting. It to me, it because the problem in software is from the day one is code as text. Uh, you can have a source code. You can go and you can make all kinds of changes. It takes anything. I mean, we're assuming you're using just a regular, notepad, whatever.
Yeah.
It will not push back. To learn whether what you changed is working or if something's pushing back, you have to go through some steps. You have to, compile it and build it and blah, blah, and try it, run it. And then you can see, oh my God, well, then the change I made doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
So code as text is the problem, right? Because the reason is delayed feedback. Like if we are working with real life objects, like if you're tuning the guitar, the moment you hit the string, you immediately hear it. You can hear if it's out of tune or not. Imagine if you're tuning the guitar via writing some script, and then you have to,
Right. Well, what you're effectively doing is turning the tuning key what you believe to be the prescribed number of times to achieve the correct tone, and then you're handing it to someone else, and then they pluck it and they go, no, it's not right.
Yeah. Or you can't even touch the pegs, right? The tuning pegs.
Right.
You have some
You're giving instructions for how many times to turn it.
You have some machine. Here you have a script. You're writing the script. You're compiling it. You're putting it in development. You're QAing it, and then it goes like promoted, blah blah, and then deploys to that machine, and the machine turns it, and then you learn about whether it's out of tune or not like 5 weeks later.
Yeah. Right. And it doesn't work because it was 3% more humidity, so the strings were different tension, right? So you've got environmental backlash.
And so if that were the case, nobody would ever play guitars. Right? They're just like, or forget. Right? But that's how software is today, basically. You
right.
You can make
so a good practice. I apologize, I didn't mean to cut you off, but like this idea, like you said, it seems terrifying, right? That everything you do, every keystroke is a live implementation, like you're in a real live environment. But in a way, that goes back to first principles thinking, right? The same way that we don't package 55 commits into a single implementation from 3 developers, right? So we ship more often. We learn to do that, like ship often, ship regularly. This way, every change is a very small iteration, and the amount of variance it almost guarantees or ensures the risk is significantly lower on that risk curve because of the amount of change in that single change. So you're better to do many changes more often than large scale. Hey, it's the time for the monthly build. And you're like, oh, well, these 3 libraries were developed independently, and then now they don't work together. So now when you go to a live environment, it's the same pure first principles thinking where you have to stop and say, okay, if everything I do is going to have a direct and immediate impact, then how do I change what I'm about to do to ensure the best outcome?
Yeah, it's like a friend of mine, now you may find it cringy, when he goes to the dentist and has to be some tooth work or drilling, he insists no anesthesia, no local. I'm like, are you crazy? He says, no, because now he's going to be way more careful.
It's a forcing function, right?
Not just digging deep into, and just who gives a shit that they don't even feel anything. He says, no, now pay attention. The dentist is going to be way more careful how they work. Anyway, that's an extreme. Okay, so 3 things. One is limiting the blast radius, which is always a concern in operations. Second one is shortening the feedback latency. You're craving feedback as soon as possible. When you touch something, I would like to immediately know if I broke it or not, right? Which in software is not the case. I don't know, right? It takes a long time for me to actually learn that, actually this change didn't break anything, right? It has to go through all these pipelines and, millions of things. And So that immediately means that the quality of work suffers because I'm making all these changes, I'm working, but I don't even know if it makes sense or not. That's pretty shoddy way of working, but that's how it is right now. And lastly, what was the third thing? So it's, oh yeah, reversibility. If you
Right. Yeah, this is
if
this
it's
is the key, right?
if it's a no-brainer to reverse, okay, I messed up, I'm going back to healthy state. That's the way to work. I know I
Right.
will never destroy anything. And that's the beauty of software, is that if we make those tiny little micro steps, then the moment we break something, whoop, back to healthy state.
Right.
That gives you the creativity. That gives you the opportunity to spread your wings and innovate, create. Because if you're not doing that, you can spend days in your lab innovating, creating, only to learn at the end of the week that this is all crap. And you're like,
Yeah.
I'm going to spend time on this anymore.
Well, that's the problem is we as humans, right? So I mean, and I think you and I probably experienced this directly, right? You know, we had a problem that goes to production. It takes out production because we were testing the thing we were putting into production, not testing the thing that was already in production that uses the thing we just put into production.
Yeah.
So we find out that suddenly a secondary process breaks, and in doing so, the retaliation to that is what we're going to do is we're going to freeze changes midweek because we can't risk this happening because we have nightly batches. Like, okay, so we're moving it to weekends. Now, 4 times a month, you're making changes, which are now larger scale. And then even worse, something goes wrong on the first weekend, you push something in, they're like, okay, we need to make sure that you're thinking really hard about this. We're gonna raise the bar and increase the number of gates that it's now once a month. So you're you're just packing together all these changes. And the worst thing is then somebody says, "Hey, we haven't had any production outages since we've implemented this change program." And you're like, that's like Ernie with a banana in his ear. And Bert says, "Why do you have a banana in your ear?" He says, "It's to keep away elephants." He says, "That can't possibly work." He goes, "Do you see any elephants?"
Obviously works.
This is what we do. So we say, well, if we limit the amount of changes we do,
No,
then right, we got no risk of outages. But meanwhile, when you do put one in, it's a grenade tossing in through an open door and just
then and then you get to that worst possible position. That I cringe when you hear from bosses coming and saying failure is not an option.
yeah.
I hate that. That's like ultimatum, right?
Yeah.
And
And the counter we often get stuck with too is this thing of, you know, fail early, fail often, and then people misconstrue what we mean by failure, meaning you effectively you're pressure testing the thing. That's really what it is like to the point of failure. So you know, like, oh, okay, if I'm going to break, I want to break as often as I can with the lowest blast radius
yeah,
and in a way that I can understand how to go back to the previous stage, right? This is the beauty of why we have version control was the fact that you could just simply do a rollback. And
yeah,
then we said, oh, but there's a migration to the database that happens. Okay, no problem. Let's include a reverse migration as well. And like we were forced because of that method now to include reversing into the implementation
yeah,
because we got bitten, right? So now if you suddenly create this idea of an immutable baseline, at least to that point, you live make a change, something goes awry, well, no problem, you know, system reset, right? Just go back to the last safe state. It's, I mean, the thing that's been a practice in operating systems and in many,
yeah, yeah,
you know, NVRAM based systems forever. It's like do all these changes. And if something goes wrong, just reboot and go back to last safe state.
yeah. And that's very symptomatic. And like you say, many of these instances of like, okay, I cannot reproduce, I cannot troubleshoot. They all get resolved when you reboot, pretty
Right.
much. Which means we don't really understand our systems. They have grown bigger than us, and
Yeah.
only by retreating back to our like baseline, okay, now we're back to normal. So that's another thing to keep in mind. But what was I trying to say? Another thing I want to discuss with you, Eric, if you have a few more minutes.
Yeah, luckily I'm good for so I've got 5 more minutes. I wish we could only go longer. If it wasn't for the
Oh,
fact that I had a meeting right on
oh,
the back of this,
yeah,
I would love to
I
keep
have
going.
I have hard stop at in 35 minutes, but we can go. Um, One thing that I'm discovering more and more is that we tend to always drag familiar things when we encounter something new, or something we're not really 100% clear. We always like to kind of oh, it's just like this, right? It's just like something that I'm very familiar with, and I have mastered, and now that makes me feel comfortable. Oh yeah, yeah, I get it, I get it. It's actually basically like this. So what I'm seeing in software in general is we unconsciously tend to view software as same as we view physical objects. So
Yeah.
like you and I sit down and we say, hey, let's build a new model of the guitar. Now at that point, you and I can pretty much come up with some kind of a blueprint. We know it's going to have the neck and the frets, and it's easy for us to envision how will this finished product look, pretty much. How will it function? Or we can take any other wristwatch, a chair, a desk, a shelf, a house, a car. All these things we can envision ahead of time, and we won't be that much off, right?
Yeah.
The problem with software is we cannot do that. And yet we all pretend that we can see into the future and we can exactly envision, yeah, let's say we want to launch something in September this year. Yeah, we know this is going to look like this, is going to do this and that. That never turns out to be true.
That's right.
And yet we keep willfully ignoring that. And we move into the project with this confidence and assurance that I know exactly what I want. I know exactly how this is going to look, and I know exactly what functionality will provide. And that I'm discovering is the biggest problem. If we were only to tool down and confess, look, I cannot see into the future. I really don't know how this is going to function. That
Yeah.
will change everything. But you cannot get anyone to agree to that. Somehow people feel so. What I'm trying to say is, when I look at really successful industry leaders and all that, I see them not doing projects. I see them experimenting. They're doing
Right.
experiments, and it is so hard to sell experimentation in the situation where people want to know, why am I dunking this budget into this? I want to know exactly what I'm going to get at the end of it. So we are at this kind of, I think, crossroads where we need to make this transformation and agree that we don't know exactly how this is going to turn out, but we need to continue experimenting, and in these little steps, right?
Right.
Incrementally growing the product, learning, twisting and turning, pivoting, blah, 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 right? That's the nature of the beast. But for some reason, I'm seeing everybody's like, no, 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 I think it's exactly like building a wristwatch. No, it's not. Because you start one way, but look at what comes at the end, right? But there's never an end unless you decommission your product. It keeps.
Right. Yeah.
So there is no end state. That's another thing that we assume that is a final product, but there isn't.
It's
So
1.0, right? We give them numbers to indicate a finality or a major milestone, and we sort of like, oh, this is the 4.0 product, yay! And we have a big party, and we name the project. Everybody gets a mug and a T-shirt, and you open up some baby duck and celebrate in the office.
but, but the nature of software, it's soft, it's changeable, it's
Right.
easy to change, right? Otherwise, it would be hard, right? It would be hard, but not so easy to change. And so that's another thing that I find it very like impeding the progress, because we just waste too much time with this big upfront planning, with having the big upfront design, and everything has to be fleshed out. I need to see the blueprint. And it never, like they say, no plan ever survives the first contact with the enemy, right?
Yeah.
It just goes up in smoke. So why even bother in spending so much time and setting yourself for failure and for disappointment, instead of saying, look, let's just start making small steps. With every step we get feedback, we reassess, are we going in the right direction, keep going. If not, okay, change, try this, try that, experiment, innovate. This is the nature of our profession. And yet everybody wants to pigeonhole us into some kind of a, oh, you're making shoes, okay, so you need like it's sold, you need,
Right.
we don't know how this is going to turn out. That this is the beauty of it, and yet this is what scares people, right?
I
So that's
think that
yeah,
what we need to figure out is how do we reward that familiarity is the effective guardrails that allow us to experiment freely. Like that should be the familiarity. You effectively build your business rules into guardrails so that you're writing, think of business logic, business rules, environment rules. Like think, how do we create the right ways in which it's sort of self-gating, self-managing, self-correcting ideally, but even just the fact that it can like say, hey, some criteria has not been met, you won't make it past this gate, and then we celebrate that is the new 1.0, right? That is the new thing that we should be having the cupcakes for. What instead, we go all the way to the point of designing what we believe it should look like. It doesn't look like it's supposed to. It looks like the Homer, sort of the famous, the car designed by I needed to have this and this, and it's this monstrosity. But if we can reward people for creating ways in which you can freely experiment, that is the sort of the panacea. And it's not a long trip to get to the first stage. Like it's very easy to what's the shortest thing? Like just sort of say to yourself, I need to put code into production right now. You're like, it's the middle of the day. Like, doesn't matter. How do we do it right now? And it immediately, you stop me, say, okay, I've got code here. I've got development here. I've got database. Like you are forced to go back to first principles thinking of like, if I get told, we are going to take your parents away. If you don't complete this now, you get pretty inventive. And I think we need every team has to find their inventor, and hopefully a lot of inventors.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to start rewarding that as an industry. And then the business will see the benefit, because the business will be like, hey, my team is super innovative because we've had zero risk, implementations. We've had lots of changes, tons of application movement and velocity, all of the buzzwords, synergies, velocities, all of the good things that the CIO wants to hear. But meanwhile, internally, you've created a protection system where you're like, hey, I've effectively got a bulletproof vest to change. Like, go ahead, go for it, shoot.
As the saying goes, if it hurts, do it more often.
Right.
And then you build up the strength. And like I said, those are metrics that people keep an eye on, like mean time to recovery.
Right.
This approach will be seconds. Somebody discovers an issue, roll back small, blast radius, mean time to recovery, seconds. That's very impressive, right?
Exactly. And with that, I apologize. I do have to run because now I'm getting poked from my other meeting that's waiting for me. But I could say, number one, Alex, thank you. This has been amazing to be able to chat. Let's do this again. I've got a subject for, I want to do this again and not be guarded by my gateway being my meeting that comes after.
Okay.
Software will write itself. How do we stay relevant to prove that, like that, I'm doing a lot of stuff around Chat GPT and language, but I'd love to talk to you about Copilot, GPT, and a lot of that stuff. But I'll say kudos, number one, your practices and methods, while maybe taking 3 decades to finally become real in a lot of people's daily practices, are coming. And you personally gave me a lot, whether you realized it or not, in the time we worked together. And I'm forever thankful for it. And it's being surrounded by people that are not bound by limitations and that welcome experimentation automatically gives people the feeling of freedom, right? We say this, it's culture, right? Culture, people seek a culture of belonging, and it's because it's safety.
Yeah.
And if we create the ability to be free to experiment and to talk out loud and to iterate, just put an idea out there, that's something that you've taught me well, and I saw you do it in practice, and I've taken that and given it to my teams. So for that, thank you.
You're fantastic, Eric. I just want to say one quick thing. In addition to creating safe spaces, I think we should be creating brave spaces where we encourage people to bring up difficult subjects, difficult, unpleasant things. Be brave. Let's air it out. Airing of grievances. Festivus, you know.
Exactly. If it hurts more, do it more often. I agree wholeheartedly. So
We'll continue. I have many more things to ask you. So
for sure. Yeah. So and to all those who hopefully have made it to the end here, thank you. And of course, you can, I'll give you links to get in contact. I'm
yeah,
always happy to chat with anybody. Disco Posse, it's easy to find all over the internet.
follow,
And
follow Eric. Follow Eric. You will learn a lot and very, very many practical advices and tips and recommendation. Thank you, Eric.
And the occasional good dad joke. So
Oh yeah, of course.
and maybe some music and audio visual fun. So with that, Alex, thank you very much.
Thank
And
you.
yeah, we will chat again very soon.